suggests two women died under abortion restrictions. And now Kamala Harris is blaming Donald Trump.
It's immoral. It's immoral.
Also, 47 days until the election, the Republican nominee demands his party shut down the government over his election lies.
Politically beyond stupid.
And Melania Trump emerges to sell a book, but not necessarily her husband.
Why do I stand proudly behind my nude modeling work?
Live at the table, Jonah Goldberg, Naira Hawk, Jeff Duncan, and Madison Gessiato. Welcome to a special edition of Newsnight, State of the Race. Good evening. I'm Abby Phillip in New York. Let's get right to what America is talking about. Did Kamala Harris just get a major economic boost, or did Donald Trump just get another reason to criticize her? For the first time since the pandemic, in 4 years, the Fed cut interest rates. It's a big, big move, especially if you're trying to make a big, big purchase. And some economists say it shows a soft landing, that the United States is finally turning the page on inflation. But there are some others who say it could mean a downturn is on the horizon. Now, as for the candidates, Harris calls it some welcome news. Trump, though, he's saying it's all politically motivated.
I guess it shows the economy is very bad to cut it by that much. Assuming they're not just playing politics, the economy would be very bad, or they're playing politics, one or the other. But it was a big cut.
Joining us in our fifth seat tonight is CNN economics analyst Catherine Rampell. Catherine, I'll let you take that on from Donald Trump. I'll add to it Steve Moore, who is a conservative economist. He says, I'm not saying a 50-point reduction isn't justified. It may well be, and they have more data than I do, but I just think, why now? There's no reason that they couldn't do 25 now and 25 after the election.
This is just nonsense. Look, we know from Milton Friedman, noted Democrat, of course, that Fed policy works with long variable lags, meaning that whatever the Fed did today, we are not going to feel it in the economy by November. If the Fed were actually trying to do something, I'm not saying they were, but if they were trying to do something to help Democrats, they would have cut rates like 9 months ago. That's around the time you would have needed to have any sort of effect on the real economy at this point. But more to the point, the Fed is politically independent. They prize their political independence. It is important for them to be seen as above the political fray, as not being influenced by the near-term political, ups and downs of what's going on in the economy, or what's going on in the country, in order for their medicine to work, right? If people don't believe that they are politically independent, then they're going to say, well, we don't really believe that they're committed to stable prices, and so, inflation and expectations can get unmoored. We've seen this happen in lots of other countries.
And as you're talking there, it just reminds me that yet again, this is like another institution that Trump thinks is operating in a political way. And so he then says, well, if I were president, I would make them political. I would put my thumb on the scale because I have a right to, because that's what they're doing. But that's not what's happening here.
No, it's good. The entire point of having a monetary system that is independent is for these to be clear-eyed views and perspectives. Now, the idea of inflation and the economy being political issues, yes, but there is only so much that each president can do when you have some fundamental challenges and shocks to the system to bring the economy back to a place where it's not just the economic indicators, but people feel like it's better. So this is just another opportunity for both candidates to jump on the lowering of interest rates to pretty much advance their own economic policy agendas.
I mean, don't you think there is a psychological effect to this, though? I mean, Catherine's right that it's a lagging indicator, but I know a lot of people who have been anxiously had this date circled on their calendars. They want to buy a house. They're just thinking longer term about their lives, and they want to know if these interest rates are going down. Will that psychological effect help?
Yeah, look, I think the psychological effect, at minimum, it can't hurt Harris, right? I mean, I don't see how you could spin it away and say, oh, so interest rates are finally starting to come down. That's bad for Harris, right? So And you can tell just from where the noises that the Trump world are making that they're uncomfortable with this. And I agree entirely with Catherine. The idea that somehow the Fed has been doing Joe Biden's bidding is a little hard to square with the fact that Joe Biden has been chased out of running for president because he was so unpopular because the economy was doing so badly.
And he would have done. He would have liked to have seen this.
You asked Joe
months
Biden
ago.
when he would have liked to have seen interest rates go down,
Right.
and it was 9 months or a year ago.
But if he's smart, he won't say anything at
Of
all.
course, right. Although he did recently put on a Trump hat, so like, fingers
really
crossed
never know
for
anymore.
Biden world, yeah. But it's like inflation. If all of a sudden we saw that inflation just stopped entirely, prices would still be high, but psychologically that would be really reassuring to a lot of people. And
Well, I think the argument that President Trump was making and that some Republicans on the right are making is that the cut is an indication of maybe some bad times to come. And of course, the bigger question is how does this impact people? Obviously, like she said, it is a lagging indicator. But when you look at a lot of the things people across the country are struggling with right now, like credit card debt, we're looking at people who maybe have a $1,000 credit card bill. When you cut and they have maybe a 20% interest rate, we're talking about 42 cents they're saving monthly on their finance charges. This is not that much. So people economically, I think, are still struggling in this country, and we're going to need a lot more relief than that to really move the ball. Of course, housing's still a huge issue. A lot of economists saying, we could continue to see rent prices rise, and this may not solve the crisis that we're seeing in the housing market whatsoever.
And the housing crisis isn't one just of interest rates, right? It's affordability, it's access, it's what is available. And for folks who are trying to get into that next tier, I mean, our generation of millennials, we are unable to buy homes at rates that have never been seen before because of the price gap.
But
here's
that's
what I would-
because it's hard to build.
I think
in
it's
this country.
interesting.
Yeah, and I
It
should
has-
say,
it's not- I mean,
we
interest
have
rates
seen,
have made it more expensive, but the primary reason why housing is so unaffordable is that we've made it almost impossible.
and
so I
we
was gonna
have we
say-
have seen rates like this, but I do think there's something to be said for people who 4 years ago. This is the psychological element of it. 4 years ago, they said to themselves, I was seeing 2.5, mortgage rates, and I could afford twice as much house as I can afford right now. There is a psychological component to this that's making people feel just pretty dour.
The economy is 3D chess for sure, but it's interesting. The candidates are trying to solve for a different problem with today's announcement than the Fed is and Jerome Powell. They're trying to talk about inflation, and Jerome Powell is trying to cushion ourselves against some sort of free fall in an economic situation where deflation starts to kick in. So we're trying to find this equal balance. It's interesting, if you're sitting here and trying to retire, you look at your house is worth more than it's ever been worth, your assets, your 401ks, your portfolio. And so there's different parts of the economy. But I think if you look back at 2001 and 2007, at the peak of the equity markets is when they started making their first round of cuts. And then you watched what happened over the next 12 to 18 months if you don't play this out right. This isn't some sort of guaranteed Goldilocks situation. This is a very difficult, but I do think it is so disingenuous of Americans to not give blame to both parties for getting us to this spot. We printed $16 trillion worth of money we didn't have over the last 8 years, and we handed it out under the guise of economic crisis, under the guise of health crisis, under the guise of whatever crisis. $16 trillion we don't have. Therefore, we get to these peak interest rate moments, and then we come back and fall down.
So I want to shift gears a little bit, though, because there was another piece of big news today. The Teamsters, the union that has been dragging its feet on an endorsement for some time now, they decided what they were going to do. No endorsement for Harris, no endorsement for Trump. But in the meantime, they did economic question, because I don't think this has anything to do with economics, right?
It is astonishing.
The facts are what they are. The Biden-Harris administration literally bailed out the Teamsters pensions. But that's really not what this debate is about within this particular union.
It's not only that. So you point out that, yes, they bailed out the Teamsters pensions. That's not the only major favor or whatever you want to call it that Democrats have recently bestowed on the Teamsters or on union members in general. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, walked the picket line with the UAW. Donald Trump was recently in a conversation with Elon Musk cheering for trying to unionize, and Sean O'Brien, the Teamsters leader, referred to that as economic terrorism. There are all of these data points that are aligned, reliable on the preferences of union members, including Teamsters members, and yet it's not about that, right? It's about culture war issues or some other sort of affect related to Trump rather than his policy stances or or really his record.
It is shocking how many times you will see voters voting against their own interests because of a cultural perception. I mean, listen, the head of the Teamsters was at the RNC. He was rallying for Trump, and so for the Teamsters then to not endorse Trump shows how much dissension there was and tension there was in the ranks. Biden and Harris have gotten pretty much every other union endorsement. They also have their own independent field operation, which is often what campaigns rely on unions to get the vote out. They've got those community connections. So I think I do see the loss for Trump for not having had the endorsement of the union behind the personality that was at his campaign.
Yeah, but this is a huge win for Trump. I mean, this is a union who has not endorsed a Republican since 1988 and has endorsed a Democrat almost every single time in 30 years, other than sitting out in 1996. So I think them sitting out is the win that, obviously, of course, you could always have a bigger win, but to have that win, I think, is huge. And I do think this speaks volumes to the fact that the rank and file members of the union, as well as Democrats in general, are really losing. They're losing that touch that they had with blue-collar workers in this country.
As a Republican, I'm just kind of numb to this because I'm used to not getting the Teamsters support, right? So this seems like no big deal. But I do think it speaks louder volumes to kind of these mixed coalitions that we're going to see form, and just kind of the electorate is going to be in a blender showing up to vote in 2024 in November. And we're going to see all kinds of different, and I think that leads to some of the noise in the polling that we're seeing too show up, and it's just awkward. We can't put our fingers on the pulse.
I mean, I think the Teamsters are essentially a canary in the coal mine of the erosion or dismantling of the old FDR coalition that we've been seeing for a very long time. Trump did not create that. Trump accelerated it. You can go back to Nixon, his relationship with the unions. I just want to say, look, I do not credit the head of the Teamsters talking about how he is representative of the working man. Right? It is a euphemism that a lot of unions use to make it sound like if you're not a member of the union and you don't support the union, that union, the Teamsters, just got out of federal receivership for like a quarter of a century because it took them that long to get the mob out of it. Teamsters are a historically corrupt goon squad. And there are other unions that if I were a Democrat, I'd be very proud to have in my corner. The Teamsters aren't necessarily one of them. But regardless, only place I disagree with you is I agree with you. There are a lot of voters who don't vote their economic interests anymore. But that is something that is scalable up and down the socioeconomic spectrum, where we have moved from the old definition of what it means to be left, which is to be class conscious of the Bernie Sanders model, and much more into sort of the cultural politics of the sort of the squad model, and that reverberates all over the place, and that's one of the reasons why the white working class is leading the Democratic coalition.
I think that this reveals that there's been a little bit of a kind of glossing over the fact that within unions there are all these racial and cultural tensions. Now it's just breaking wide open. The idea that everybody can just come under one economic tent, that's been questionable.
There's also a generational issue here, right? We're in an election right now where there's going to be 41 million new voters. After this election, the majority of the electorate will be between the age of 18 and 45, right? The unions of old were largely appreciated and recognized by the boomer generation. Young workers, gig workers, are recognizing the value of unions, but they're going to take a different form than what the Teamsters have taken in the past.
If Trump had caved on right to work, which is what the Teamsters wanted, but I think the Teamsters would have endorsed it.
We'll see. I mean, I will. We'll see if that ever happens. Catherine, thank you very much for joining us. Everyone else, stick around for us because coming up next, there's a chilling report: the death